All right. Hi, good people. I'm Dr. Vernita White. I go by Dr. V, and I'm your life expansion strategist. I'm here for Vlogmas, and I'm excited. So this is going to be like the longest intro of Vlogmas. I am doing something different. I want to add some life in here. I've given myself like a 30-day challenge. And what I've been telling like clients and putting on my social media posts is that if you're watching this in December, by the way, don't be in a hurry to plan for the next if you haven't built your consistency muscle, right? So I challenge people to do a 30-day challenge, either do something that you can do in 30 days. I think I gave like 10 ideas on my social media. And then if you couldn't figure out which one, then do one thing consistently for 30 days. And that is going to start setting your brain up for success. So when you start planning for 2023 and beyond, your brain is like, okay, we actually do complete things. So I'm encouraging everyone to do that who follow me. And if you don't follow me, go ahead and do so. But this is one of the things that I did. I have 4 things that I'm doing, and I just made like little tracking sheets. I'll be honest, I have a Cultivate What Matters planner, and I have not used it for months. So I was like, well, let me get some use out of the monthly spread. So I'm tracking my social media here. I'm doing the YouTube videos to make sure I'm consistent with that, especially this new topic, which we're going to get into later today. I want to be consistent with talking about my e-commerce business. I have clean living products. I have an e-commerce business. Mainly, I use the skincare and the wellness products, but we have a wide variety of those. I have my workout, and it's nothing intense. I'm just tracking the miles that I walk and writing. I am in the process of getting ready to submit a book proposal to an agent. So I want to make sure that I keep my writing up. So I started on December 2nd, which will be exactly 30 days to the end of the year. So what doesn't get measured doesn't get completed. So do that. All right. So back into what I'm doing for this video. I've had this idea for some time, and I was like, I don't think I want to do that because one, I've worked on this whole thing about being, into personal development, personal growth, expand your life. That's why I call myself the life expansion strategist. I talked about some of my education background before, and then I was like, well, I've transitioned or reinvented. Like, well, who cares if they want to hear about that? But then I was like, it's my channel. I get to talk about what I want. And part of disciplining yourself, training yourself to listen to your intuition is go ahead and act on the inspired action or the divine downloads that you are receiving, and don't judge them. So I've had this idea to do commentary about articles that I see that come into my inbox regarding the ivory tower or higher education. And if you don't know, I was a college professor for 5 years. I was on the tenure track. Then I took myself off the tenure track. And then if you don't know, I was actually fired from that position. I don't think I've said it that casually before, but it is what it is, like no shade. And I can tell I'm growing. I'm healing from that. And I probably have it on my channel of what happened. If not, it'll be in my book that's coming out. Well, I'm saying it's coming out. I don't have an agent yet at the time of this video, but I am already speaking it into existence. So you'll read all about it in there when we get into it. So anyway, I had this idea of talking about things that I see. A lot of us are subscribed to different email lists, and articles come out, and I'm part of one, and I will read them and I was like, okay, those are interesting. And then I have my spin and my take on some of them. But then I was like, again, who cares about higher education? Who wants to read about what goes on in the ivory tower? And I was like, well, I'm interested in it, so I'm going to talk about it. This is my first one. And we're going to talk about how the ivory tower be ivorying. The ivory tower. So let me give you some background on, and if you see me look up, I'm looking at my notes. We're not even going to pretend that I memorized all of this. I read the article, took some notes, but I was like, let me get this video out so I can have something up for Vlogmas. We don't get too far down the road. So I have the Ivory Tower estate. This is definitions that I looked up. Like, I know what they mean, but I want to share with you all. So the Ivory Tower, a state of privilege, seclusion, or separation from the facts and practicalities of the real world. And then it says, what does an ivory tower symbolize? An ivory tower is a place or an atmosphere where people are happily cut off from the rest of the world. It's common to talk about colleges and universities as intellectual ivory towers. If you're in an ivory tower, you live in a world of ideas separate from the realities of most people's lives. That is actually very true. I've been in higher education more than I've been in any other area. I have 5 degrees, from bachelor's degree to my PhD. So that's a lot of time in higher education. And then I became a college professor. So yeah, a lot of years spent in higher education in that atmosphere. And it really is like you're separate from the world. And if you went, even as a student, you know that it's very different when you come back home from your friends or family members who may have never attended college, and they're like, you're acting so different, or why are you thinking like that? You weren't like that before you left. It's because you've been in a little bubble. All right, so the meaning of ivory tower, it is also used to describe those who grew up with comfort and wealth, as in the variant raised in an ivory tower. The idiom can be applied to anyone who seems unaware of harsh truth and is naive but haughty, superior, spoiled, and unaffected. That's, yeah, a lot of that is true. When people often hear about ivory tower, a lot of people think about the professors, the privileged, the white Americans, mainly the white males in the United States, even though the first universities weren't here in the United States. They were in ancient Rome, I believe, the University of Bologna, one of those, back in 1055. Okay. So, but in the United States, we know the Ivy Leagues. That's where you get that from, the Harvards, the Princetons, the Yales, things like that. So, when people hear about that, think of white men sitting in a place that are just talking and sharing ideals, and then it morphed into a lot of things. People sometimes think that, well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'll finish that statement. They were not designed for people just to go get jobs, and somehow it's come across that way all of these decades of go to college so you can get a better job, but that wasn't the purpose of universities and colleges at all. Just saying, for those of you who may not be familiar with that, but I won't get too deep. I'm going to talk about how the ivory tower be ivorying. I don't have a specific format for this. I'm just going to jump right in. So I found 5 articles that I want to discuss. And I was going to let me research and just do all 5 of them, and then I could just come back and knock them out. And I was like, why put that stress on myself? Let's go ahead and do, if I do 1 a day, cool. If I do 2 a day, fine. And so I'm going to do this first one. And this one is Reed College Professor Quits Months After Racist Video. And it was written by Scott Jaschik on the 2nd of December. So I'm going to do the most recent ones as I can, or whatever ones that pop out to be interesting for me. And so I'll put the description and the link below if you want to go read them. A lot of these are commentary or opinion pieces, and they do have links to the research or the polls or the surveys or other people who've chimed in, maybe news media or other professors who talked about certain stories. They do have those links in there, but I like these short, straight to the point. Even if they are opinion pieces, I read them for what they are, and then I tie in my own experiences. So I'm gonna give you a little background of what happened. And I had to dig through the video to find the video to understand what they were talking about. I'm not going to link to the video because it was buried in a lot of stuff, and you probably wouldn't be able to open the link that I opened to get into it because it was a rabbit hole of stuff and I couldn't get the direct link. But it was out there on TikTok somewhere, and you can Google search it if you just really want to find it. But I'll be honest, the video wasn't so deep. It's oh my gosh. But for people in this community, it was enough to spark an outrage and land on Inside Higher Ed. All right. So the overview of what happened, this professor, Paul Curry, he's a psychology professor at Reed College, and he had tenure. And that's important to understand, and we'll get to that. So he decided to resign after this video surfaced, and he will resign January 6, 2023. If you're not familiar with the way colleges and universities are set up, it's like you have to finish out the semester, and he's resigning before the next semester starts. So he can't, I don't want to say he can't. It's not favorable for him. It makes no sense for him to resign in 2022 at the end of the semester, because they're on break, college break. I said we, like I'm still in there. I'm not in there. On break. So he has to resign at the beginning of the next semester. Okay, so that's why it's 2023. So when the video came out in March, it was like all of the students who saw it, they were in an uproar. And it's interesting. As I was doing this research, I didn't think about this, but the students have a lot of power at universities. Sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's bad. And a lot of people don't like when I say this, but I reference it to sometimes where the inmates run the prisons. Not saying that the college students are inmates, not saying that universities are prisons, but you came there to learn and to get what you needed to get, but then they have so much power to where they can get people fired. And it's like, well, can you put that energy in other places? But I mean, on one hand, I am glad that students can organize something and have these ideas and thoughts. And on the other hand, it's like, professors don't have that same power and protection in a lot of cases. And speaking directly about me and other situations. But anyway, so the students causing the uproar. This is out in Portland. And in the video, Paul, first of all, Paul had on a mask when he went through the drive-through window. And then he had his dog in the back seat. And he was asking the server, where she was from. And it was mid-sentence. So it could be taken out of context. We don't know, because it's only 30 seconds and we don't know what was said before. It looks as if she knew, like they were already in a conversation and she felt this going somewhere, and she kind of pulled up the phone and started recording and caught it mid-sentence. But I'm not excusing his behavior, but I'm just saying we didn't see what transpired before that. So he was asking her where she was from, and she does have a slight accent. I'm not saying that to excuse him, but I just want to, if you're not going to watch the video. So she does have a slight accent, and he was like, well, where are you from? And she was like, here. And he was like, so they let something about immigrants and their rude behavior, because he felt that she was being rude towards him. So he was like, well, where are you from? And she was like, here. And he was like, here where? And she was like, Portland. And he doesn't go on to say, like, to investigate, but he was really saying, no, you're not from here because you have an accent. And she was like, I was born here, And I saw a video one time, and you can chime in and let me know. If a white person asks a person who's not white where they're from in the United States, they take offense. But if a non-white person asks them, I think he was from Pakistan. This guy who said this on TikTok, he was like, if a white person asks him where he's from, he says, I think he said, he's like, I'm from Brooklyn. And he watched their faces, to be confused. But he says if a non-person asks him where he's from, he said he doesn't take offense from. He was like, oh yeah, my family roots were in Pakistan, but I'm from New York. You got to be in this package to kind of understand that, in my opinion, unless you're just a really aware person. But anyway, and I'm like that sometimes when I ask people where they're from. And I was like, yeah, your origin or your background. It's like, not saying that you don't belong here, but I'm just curious, but I get to do that. Anyway, I'm getting too far off. So he does appear like a little slurish, like he maybe had a sip or two. People actually called him drunk. I don't know. He just looked, under some kind of influence. But he had a mask on. This is how they identified him. He had a mask on, but his dog in the back kind of like hit the mask and it came off a little bit. And instead of him putting the latch back on, it just flung wide open. So you got a clear view of who this man was. And I think he kept it off. And then some other guy on the other side of the car was like, hey, are you being racist? I'm gonna bash out all of your windows or whatever. And he was like, you can't do that or whatever. And then it goes off. So students saw this. They were all in uproar. They're like, he should be fired. He should be fired because he's racist. And a lot of people on that Twitter thread were asking for specific action steps. What are you going to do to make sure he's fired? We need to know what the university said. And the university, and I'm not going to read her response, but she wrote a response into the video. And the reason why I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm going to highlight the part that everyone was like in uproar about. So she was like, paraphrasing, it's unfortunate that this happened. We don't stand for this at Reed College. We're going to make sure we look into the matter, this, that, and the other. This should not have something. And then there's a part in there about valued member of the community. Two ways to look at that. People only looked at it one way, but I'm looking at it as another way. Some people looked at this as, because I thought she meant the valued member of the community, the lady that worked at the restaurant. Maybe she did. Some people thought that she meant the valued member of the community as far as the professor. So they were like, well, how is this drunk racist a valuable member of the community? Well, let me tell you how, if she's talking about him, this is how. He's a tenured professor. If you don't know anything about how higher education works, there's hierarchies, right? The golden track or the golden status is to become a tenured professor. That's why I said I was on a tenure track. And that means essentially, once you get over a certain hump, you have a job for life. You cannot be fired unless you're out here just being completely reckless, right? So you put in the time, the years that you teach, the research that you do, the service that you provide to the university and the community, and you document all of your things. And sometimes it can take, to be an actual professor, it can take 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. And then if he was a full professor, because it goes assistant professor, associate professor, and full professor. If he was full professor, he went through this a few times and he's like at the top of faculty. So it just says professor. I didn't do too much digging, but either way, he has tenure. And the article says indefinite tenure, meaning like he can pretty much show up to class, do a little dance and walk out. And if he gave an assignment or said a few words, he's fulfilled his duties. Tenure can be good and bad in that way, to where you want to be protected, but at the same time, a lot of professors, like they take their foot off the gas, because to get tenure, you got to produce, and they take their foot off the gas because it's like, oh, I can coast now. And sometimes students suffer, and other faculty members who are part of their department also suffer, because it's like you're not pulling your weight anymore because you feel like you've arrived, right? Now, a little bit is like, yes, I worked hard to get here, so I should be good. But then it's like, you don't want to just chill all the way. But anyway, so people are saying, well, how's he of value to the community if she said that? Because he put in the work to be a professor. Whether he started at Reed or not, he's done his part to contribute to psychology. And for him to get tenure at Reed or wherever he was, but he's a tenured professor at Reed, that means he put in time, energy, he taught, he probably did research, he probably got grant money for the school, made a name for the school. So he's a valuable member of that community. And I'm going to say she had a right to say that. This may be controversial, but she doesn't know the lady that works at the restaurant. So while that lady, she is a valuable member of the community at large, but if she's not a valuable member of the academic, community, unless she was a student. Now you can come at me for that, but just understand what I'm saying. Like, I'm not saying she's not important, but if you're talking about, is she benefiting the university as a whole? Not unless she's a student or she has some part of the university. All right, let me get off of that before I go too deep into that. So people were saying like, oh, we need action to be taken because I don't want this type of man teaching my student, or he shouldn't be at the university. He needs to be fired immediately. One, he can't be fired immediately because he has tenure, so he has to go through a process. He has to go through due process, and I'll get to that in a minute. Then other people were saying, well, I don't want a racist teaching my child. If your child has gone to college, or you yourself have gone to college, chances are you've probably been taught by a racist or a bigot or someone with biases. We all have biases. So that's a hard one. I mean, no one's saying like, hey, are you a racist before they give people jobs? You can be a racist, bigot, whatever, fill in the blank, and still do your job as a professor. I taught K-12. I worked at district levels where I had to train other teachers and leaders. I've worked at the collegiate level. I've done consulting for other universities. There are people who are not my favorite, people who will probably never make it on the Christmas list. People, if I didn't have to interact with them, I would not. However, I know how to show up and do my job and deliver it and suppress that bias as much as possible. Now, I'm human, sometimes it comes out, but I said that to say it's very possible to be a fill in the blank and still do your job. My concern would be, did it come out towards students? Did students complain about this? Was this his first time being caught? Not that it's first time doing this, because he's a little too comfortable asking people where they're from and talking about illegal immigrants. Well, I'm saying illegal. I can't remember if he said illegal immigrants, but I know he said immigrants for sure. And I don't know, did any students complain? And that's the part sometimes that gets me, like people that are outside of academia, outside of the ivory tower, or even if you were a student, but you don't understand that the true ins and outs of higher ed. When something like that happens, and I'm not excusing or condoning his behavior, but it's like, is anybody fighting for the students who may have been subjected to that type of behavior? And if it's not, then it's like, that's not fair. It's like students probably have suffered that or had to deal with that. I know I've been on that end as a student and as a professor receiving that from students. And it's like, is anybody gonna, okay, let me back up and clarify that. As a student, I've been treated unfairly by professors, and sometimes either you speak up, but then if you do, if the professor is protected, and it's like, oh well, especially back in the day. Now phones are out, and it's not your word against theirs. It's like, it's your word in this video. I got you. I've also been on the side where students have treated me unfairly. But because of who I am, what I look like, and when I told you sometimes the inmates run the jail, they would take the students' word for it. So it's a lot of things that go on. Like I'm on the side of the students. Like I want the students to be protected if that happened to them. But then at the same time, and again, it's maybe controversial, if he didn't harm the students psychologically in that way, should he really be fired? I'm not saying it's right, but that's something to think about. The other part to that, and I'm looking at my notes, is when people are like, why does it take so long? Tenure, you work 5, 6, 8, 10, 14 years to get a certain level of tenure. You put your time in, and this is not a regular career job to where you're in corporate and you mess up and you pack your stuff up, you got to be out before the end of the day. It doesn't work like that in higher education. So when all these people are like, he needs to be fired immediately. If this would have happened, so this happened in March, and he was able to teach all the way through the fall semester. So that was the spring semester. So then he came into the fall semester, then because he had tenure. And then they had to wait until due process, and these things don't move as quickly as they could in higher education, or should. So he was able to do that. And then here's the thing. When the committee went through due process, they found that he didn't violate any policies. So when people say that the university president's, her response was weak, if you understand how the policies are written, her response wasn't that weak because he technically didn't do anything wrong. And she was trying to walk a fine line saying, I don't agree, but what did he really, really do? Because he spoke out of turn to a woman. Again, I'm not condoning it or excusing it, but you got to understand how the institution is set up. So that could be good and bad. For someone who was innocent and somebody brought something up, then they will want that same amount of grace, that same grace period. So before we say, no, hurry up and fire him, had it been someone else who was innocent and there was no proof, then you want that same amount of time. You don't want it to be just that quick because somebody said something, or if you got a little snippet of a video. So I just wanted to put that out there. So instead of, because he wasn't going to get, I don't believe he was going to get fired. I don't believe he was going to get fired, but for whatever reason, he decided to resign, and he will resign January 6, 2023. The reason why he's resigning January 6th, because that's the start of the next semester when he was being employed. I mean, we're employed, well, they were employed year round, but we're on a break. I don't know exactly how Reed College works, but if it works like any other institution, they're on winter break, so it's like why would he quit now? And who knows, it's some benefits, there's a lot of things that's tied up into that whole thing of him resigning. So he probably saw it best as, let me just go ahead and do what I need to do and get out, and I guarantee you he'll get another job somewhere. And that leads me to this other point. There's a situation that happened in my area at the University of Central Florida, and back in earlier this year, this professor, I think I saw the story earlier this year, but this happened around the George Floyd incident. And I'm going to read what happened, because it's not that long. I'm going to read it so you can hear what I'm saying. So I'm not going to read the original. This is what happened. So UCF fired him for things that he said. They didn't want to fire him, but they were like, oh, we better fire him because it was such an uproar. And in 2020, if you can remember, a lot of racial tension. Black Lives Matter was really taking off. The George Floyd incident, so many things came out, and that was just a really tight time for the United States. So anybody was going to get it. And anybody who didn't stand for the Black Lives Matter, they were going to get it too. And people who didn't make statements, it was a time. So this is what happened. And this was written in May of 2022. And I'll put the article in there as well. So Charles Nagy, I think it's Nagy, is once again a University of Central Florida professor after an arbitrator ruled in his favor this week. So he was fired for the tweets, and we'll get into what he said. And then they were like, he didn't really do anything wrong, so give him his job back. So Nagy, a professor of cross-cultural psychology who has taught the university for more than 2 decades, was terminated after posting a series of tweets claiming that Black Americans, because I'm reading 2 lines, Black Americans receive special treatment in academic discussions, university enrollment, and other areas. And this is in quotes. If African Americans as a group had the same behavior profile as Asian Americans on average, performing the best academically, having the highest income, committing the lowest crime, etc., would we still be proclaiming systematic racism exists? And then that's the end of quote. Nagy tweeted during the summer of protests following the murder of George Floyd. Nagy went on to say that Black privilege shields Black Americans from criticism. Black privilege is real, and if you can't see me, that's in quotes. All of this is in quotes. Beginning quote: Black privilege is real. Besides affirmative actions, special scholarships, and other set asides, being shielded from legitimate criticism is a privilege, he wrote. But as a group, they're missing out on much needed feedback. End quote. Those tweets and the subsequent protests by student organizations sparked an investigation into Nagy's behavior at the university. They terminated Nagy's contract in January 2021 based on what they claimed as a pattern of discriminatory harassment, quote and end quote, in the classroom. The university took care to note that the tweets were not a basis of his firing, as they believed his words were protected under the First Amendment. An arbitrator, which is an independent person, found that this didn't constitute the quote-unquote just cause for Nagy's termination because the school did not give Nagy the opportunity to amend his behavior. UCF is refusing to fight the ruling and will reinstate Nagy, though they stand by their decision to fire him. UCF stands by the actions taken following the thorough investigation that found repeated misconduct in Professor Nagy's classroom, including imposing his views about religion, sex, and race. The university shared. However, we are obligated to follow the arbitrator's ruling. And that's in quotes. So I'm not saying, and when I read this, I knew he wasn't going to, I didn't think he was going to be fired, but then I knew he was going to be hired. I knew he was going to be rehired. I didn't follow the story, but I was like, yeah, that's not enough to fire him, especially he's tenured too. And I'm not condoning it. And I know it sounds like I'm taking up for these men who don't look like me. But I understand how higher education works. And I have been in situations where I have used that privilege in my own way. So I'm not condemning the entire institution, but I understand how the institution was created and who it was created for and what it was created for. It was really about academic freedom of academic speech and academic freedom. And honestly, as a professor, you want that. And I didn't really have that academic freedom when I was there. And I would have loved, and I'm not saying that Negi or the other guy, his stuff took place outside of the institution, which is like, sometimes it's like, okay, can I just be my real person? Even if I'm jacked up, can I be my real person? But people who are teaching, you know, there's this level of status on this pedestal, but then the dollars don't match. And that's for universities as well. But anyway, that's a tangent. So his stuff is a little different. Negi, who said his things as a college professor, you want to be able to say your views at the university. K-12 is different. You're not supposed to impose your ideas on students, but at the university, that is a place where you should be able to have a diversity of thought and diversity of ideas, whether people agree or disagree. That makes a healthy person, I believe. Now, if he was treating students differently, I don't know. I wasn't in the classroom with the man. I never met the man, although we were there at the same time when I was getting, that's where I got my doctorate degree from. I don't know him, right? Some students say that he's been that way. He's been treating students that way. But it wasn't until social media, what he said, and during that time that things blew up. And it was like, well, why weren't y'all taking action if these students had already been complaining about him? That's when it's like, okay, so if y'all gonna let it slide then you might as well continue to let it slide if you didn't take a stand back then. So for UCF to say that they stand behind what they did, that's cool, but I knew he wasn't going to get fired because of the foundation of universities. That's what goes on in the ivory tower. That's why the ivory tower be ivorying. So on the one hand, again, I don't agree, but he's allowed to make statements based on what he observes. And I'm going to agree a little bit. There is something I'm going to say black privilege. I'm a black female, and so it's sometimes a catch-22, but in certain cases, a black female with a PhD, when I get in certain rooms, there is a privilege that I have, and I use it. I do. And if me being a black female, a black person, someone with this advanced degree, this elite degree, if it allows me to get into certain rooms, then cool. But then I know that it's my character and who I am that keeps me in those places. So if there's some black privilege, then okay. But at the same time, he should be able to express himself. And the reason why I'm saying this, and hear me when I say this, because if you are a non-white professor and you have ideas and thoughts and ideologies, and you're not treating students, again, I don't know how he was treating students, but if you're not harming students, you're just saying your opinion and offering them a way to think critically and form their own opinions and engage in that healthy discussion, you will want the same freedom of speech and academic freedom. I'm just putting it out there. Again, I don't agree. I don't condone what he did, but I knew that they was going to give him his job back. He should be able to say statements like that. And the reason why he was able to do that, because he didn't, it's like, was he really racist? Did he really say anything wrong? Can he not say what he observed as a researcher, an academic? Is he not allowed? So again, I'm not agreeing with everything that he said, but I know that there are times when I have made statements about things that I observed, researched, witnessed, read, all of the things, and I've made statements and I've been attacked. And it's like, well, did I say anything to harm you, or am I stating what I think is true. And that's the foundation of higher education. I'm going off in a tangent, but because I get so excited about this, but at the same time, I do understand that both of those men, they don't look like me. And I know some people say, well, and we have another article to get to at some point about faculty, non-white faculty, especially Black and Latinx faculty, and you know how we show up in the ivory tower. But taking gender, and I know that's kind of hard to say, taking gender and background off of that, ethnic background, you can say race. I mean, you know, race is social construct, but whatever. It go a little higher. Anybody who's had the privilege to be in the institution of higher learning as a faculty member, a tenured faculty member, they understand. They may not speak out and agree or say it out loud, but they understand because they would want that same protection. Again, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not saying it's right, but I do understand. Like Chris Rock say, I'm not agreeing. I don't condone it, but I do understand. All right, so those are some of the things, if you are not aware, that goes on in the ivory tower, in the little bubble. And if you connect it to what goes on in the workforce, that's, I probably need to make that correlation too. When people are surprised about what happens in the workplace, it's like, why? Because they just went from one bubble to another bubble, especially corporate. It's like you're in the same bubble, and the same people who were in that institution, they're bringing those ideas, habits, thoughts, and, you know, mindsets into that institution. But that's another video for another day. I don't know if you enjoyed this or not, but I did. I think this is fun, and I'm going to keep doing these until I get tired of doing them. So that is my Vlogmas day 1, even though it was December 3rd at the time of this recording. I'm trying to get this up as soon as possible. But let me know your thoughts. If you got through what I was talking about, I'll link the articles down below. Let me know your thoughts. If you agree, disagree, if you had some situations, or if you know about some other articles, I would love to hear from them. I would love to read them, and maybe they'll show up and I'll talk about them. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe if you so choose. And if not, that's cool too. Just make sure you watch the video. You can turn down in the background if you want to. Just help me support me by letting it play out. All right. Also, be sure to go watch some of my other videos. I have a variety of things on this channel that could benefit you in some kind of way. And yeah, I would love to hear from you. Join the crew over here. If nothing else, if nothing else, seriously, if nothing else, remember to be well, be empowered, be bold, and be brilliant. Until next time, bye.